going to take a break. That's when ice cream's going to happen. Thank you very much. Thank you. Puppies. Puppies. Box of puppies. Okay, yeah. Ice cream and puppies. Carolyn I'll be up here. Gary's going to take a break in 45 minutes. I'll come back up here and then instruct you to follow Carolyn. There's Carolyn. Give her a hand. She is fabulous. Fabulous to work with. If you have an event that you need planned, this is a great venue, and she's a great person to help you with that. Couldn't be more appreciative. We want to acknowledge our sponsor for the event, Ramon's Ice Cream. Over there is Blaine. Wave at Blaine. Thank you, Blaine, for the ice cream. And we want to get started because it's going to be a full and jam-packed evening. So to introduce our speaker, I'm going to introduce some dear friends of ours who we just recently found out have an incredible testimony, story, and recommendation of the book Cherish and the materials you're about to hear and see and experience. And then they're going to introduce Gary as our speaker. Dennis and Melanie Simon, give them a hand.
Hello, folks. I'm Dennis Simon. This is my lovely wife, Melanie, of almost 31 years. She'll give you some information in regards to Gary's background a little bit, and why don't you do?
Gary Thomas has spoken in 49 states, and he's actually been in 14 marathons, we learned today. 10 countries outside of that. His lovely wife, Lisa, is it 30 or 31 years, Gary?
35.
35 years, wow, yeah. That's amazing. They have 3 grown children and 1 absolutely gorgeous granddaughter that we've seen pictures, her dimples are just amazing. But we had the pleasure of meeting Gary and Lisa just for dinner tonight, and we have been just absolutely blessed by the book. I've read a lot of marriage books and relationship books, but this book is pretty amazing, and I'll give this back to Denny.
I really didn't read any of those books, but she did, so needless to say, our marriage didn't go a whole lot very far with just one of the two of us doing the reading. So I took part in the Cherish book here, and I'll tell you what, it opened my eyes, it opened my mind, it opened my ears. I mean, this book has literally changed our marriage from good to great, and I would encourage each and every one of you to go through this book. Trust me, it will change your marriage. It'll make it better than you can imagine. There's also a CD and a book here that you can use in different settings. Maybe it's your own group, and use it as a group, whether it's at your home, at your church. But I would encourage you to get other people involved, because they too will be changed, and their marriages will be changed dramatically.
And just, when we were introduced to this, when you think of the title of it, when it says Cherish, when I heard this, I loved the word cherish. This book is all about over the top of we've heard about loving your wife and loving your husband and honor and all those things, and that's biblical, it's wonderful, that's necessary, but cherish goes above and beyond. And Gary's going to explain to us what that cherish really means, but we're just really thankful for having to be introduced to this book, and without further ado, can we give a warm welcome to Gary Thomas.
Thank you. I don't need that.
Oh, you don't need this.
Let's pray let's go ahead and pray if we could. Father, I thank you for each marriage represented here, the families they're directly a part of, the communities they influence. And I just pray as a gift of kindness from you, you would bless each one, that every one of us would come away with a new understanding, a new challenge, new inspiration. Father, experience marriage as you designed us to experience. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Wayne Williams grew up a Chicago Cubs fan because that was his father's favorite team. It was his childhood. They would go to games when they could, watch them on television. He remembers many times whenever his dad was doing errands around town, they would listen to the ball games. And if you know anything about Major League Baseball, you know that for so long, being a Chicago Cubs fan was an exercise in futility. It had been over 100 years since they'd gone back to the World Series. But like die-hard fans do, father and son made a promise. When, not if, but when the Cubs made it back to the World Series, they would listen to the game together. And Wayne wouldn't have had it anyway. It was such a big part of his childhood. And so when the Cubs finally did make it back in 2016, it was actually a bit of a bittersweet moment. It was sweet because finally the Cubs had made it back, but it was a little bitter because it's going to be very difficult for Wayne to keep his promise. For starters, he's now an adult. He was in North Carolina. His dad is in Indiana. But he figured he made a promise, he needed to keep it. But there was another factor that would have made it so easy to break that promise. And the fact is, his dad had actually died some years before. But Wayne was also raised with the belief if you make a promise, you keep a promise. So he traveled all the way from North Carolina to Indiana, where his dad was buried, set up a camp chair on his dad's grave, and father and son listened to the Chicago Cubs win the World Series together. Now, I don't know if that story moves you as much as it moves me, but the reason it does, the fact that a guy would take that promise that seriously when it could have been dismissed as a sentimental part of his childhood, or his dad isn't alive so it can't really count anymore. But perhaps it also impacted me because God reminded me of a promise I made, changed everything about my marriage. I'd been writing marriage books, I'd been doing marriage seminars, and some years back, God just brought back to mind a part of our marriage vows. I'm sure it was a part for many of yours. It goes like this: I promise to love and to cherish until death do us part. And I don't think after my wedding day I ever thought of the word cherish again. I always thought of love. I had chapters I wrote on love, and seminars I would have whole sessions on love. But that word cherish, what it meant, what I was actually even promising to my wife, didn't even think about it, didn't let it bother me, until I felt convicted by the Lord telling me, Gary, you made that promise. I want you to discover what it means and learn how to put it into practice. And I already thought that Lisa and I had a pretty good marriage. But there was something about resetting the bar from just love to love and cherish that brought a whole new dimension to our marriage. I was astonished at what I discovered. What I figured out is that bread is the nourishing part of marriage. You could call it the bread of marriage. It's what brings substance. It's what nourishes us. But cherishing offers the jam. It's what makes marriage tasty and delicious. And I realized the way that I was talking about marriage could make it sound more like a duty and a discipline, and rather than delight. And if we speak of love without cherish, we can actually get a little bit an unbalanced view of marriage. Because while love speaks of sacrifice and service and commitment and perseverance and hanging in there, cherish calls us to experience marriage at an entirely different level. One of the ways we can do this biblically is just to go to the most famous passage on love in the New Testament. You know, that's 1 Corinthians 13. And look at how love is described, and then compare some passages from the Song of Songs that at least conceptually begin to speak a little bit about what it means to cherish our spouse. So let's do that. According to 1 Corinthians 13:4, love is about being gracious and altruistic. Love is patient. Love is kind. But cherish is about being enthusiastic and enthralled. How much more pleasing is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your perfume more than any spice. Love tends to be quiet and understated. Love does not envy. It does not boast. But cherish boasts. Sorry. Did I skip one?
You went backwards.
I went backwards. Okay, that's where we go. Thank you. Cherish boasts boldly and loudly. My beloved is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. Love thinks about others with selflessness. Love is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. But cherish thinks about its beloved with praise. Your voice is sweet, and your face is lovely. Love doesn't want the worst for someone. Love does not delight in evil. But cherish celebrates the best in someone. How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Love puts up with a lot. Love always hopes and always perseveres, but cherish enjoys a lot. His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. Love is about commitment. Love endures all things. Love never fails. But cherish is about delight and passion. Your name is like perfume poured out. What I notice is that love focuses me on my obligations to serve, to be committed, to hang in there, what I'm supposed to do. But pursuing cherish focuses me on the excellence and the beauty and the wonder of my spouse. And it creates an entirely different experience for your spouse, because you're not there just because you made a promise and you need to be true to it, but because you want to be, because you're celebrating them, because you're enjoying them. And what it does for your spouse, it fills up their soul in an entirely different dimension than when we're just pursuing love, which can often seem like a duty and a discipline. They don't compete. Love and cherish never compete. They complement each other. In fact, I think without each other, we have a subpar marriage. Without love, cherish, it's an idealistic notion. You hear this talk, you might read a book, it sounds sentimental, you give it a shot. But without the substance of love and the commitment of love, cherish won't last. But without cherish, and this is what I think too many of us as Christians have settled for, without cherish, love becomes that duty and discipline where we grit our teeth and we hang in there. But it doesn't witness to God's love for us. It doesn't feed the soul of our spouse. And it's not going to be as satisfying for us. John Wesley spoke of sort of a cherishing aspect of marriage many years ago when he said this: the wife is to have the highest place in the husband's heart, and he in hers. No neighbor, no friend, no parent, no child should be so near and dear to either as the other. They must do more and suffer more for each other than any other in all the world. The husband must do or leave undone anything he can that he may please his wife in diet or attire, which means, men, according to John Wesley, at least our wives do get to throw away our favorite shirts, which my wife likes to take advantage of all the time. Choice of company and all things else. Each must fulfill the other's desire as absolutely as can be done without transgressing the law of God. And if we just look at that quote, isn't that the marriage we hoped we would have? Before the reality of a relationship between two people who stumble in many ways is brought together, when we dreamed of how marriage could be, isn't this really the vision we have? Two people throughout life, always putting each other above the other, always trying to bless the other, always trying to put the other's welfare above their own, not letting any other relationship impinge or pull us away from each other. You know what? The older I get, as mentioned, Lisa and I have been married 35 years, the more I see God's brilliance in creating marriage this way, because the older I get, the more I see how transitory this world is. You have great friends that get a job somewhere else and they have to move away. Parents die. Siblings move away. Even kids eventually move out, or they're supposed to. I don't know about yours, but ultimately God's design is that the kids will leave you alone. And in the midst of this, God says, throughout a transitory life, people moving in and out of your life, this is the rock-solid relationship where you can always hold each other up. The one that matters most to you, the one that you don't just love but cherish, will always be there with you. And it gives this sense of permanency that at least points to heaven, not perfectly, but it reminds us of what eternity is all about. And it just creates a different dimension in marriage. Shortly after Cherish first came out, I was speaking at a very large church in the Dallas area. They'd been planning this evening for a year. They had like 1,200, 1,500 people there. And I wanted to be at my best, and physically I felt my worst. I rarely get so sick that speaking is a problem. It's just God's mercy because I have these things planned so far in advance. But it was one night where I was laying down right before. I was laying down between sessions, barely got through it. I got to the hotel, and you know how when you have the flu and a fever and it breaks, and then you start shaking and you're cold? So I'm sitting there in the hotel bed just kind of shivering, and Lisa finally pulls me close. And I'm trying to warn her, honey, watch out. I go, this is awful. You don't want to catch it. And she said, well, aren't you cold? I said, yeah. She goes, I got to get you warm. Now that might gross out some of the younger couples. But husbands, what do you think a wife will do for a man that she knows cherishes her? In a world where she's often taken for granted, compared negatively, kids who aren't appreciating her, friends who maybe move on and have lunches with that. But then she's got this man that she knows cherishes. What will a woman do for a man like that? Whatever she thinks she needs to do to keep him there and comfortable. And wives, what do you think a husband will do for a wife that he knows cherishes him when he's so often evaluated and maybe fired or cut from a team or ridiculed or just not respected or talked disrespectfully to throughout the day, but he comes home and here's a woman who truly cherishes him. Not that he has to choose it, it's just naturally what is his response. And my experience has been when a woman cherishes her husband, it elicits something from him where he will do whatever it takes to make sure she is okay, to make sure she is safe, even to make sure she is happy, because it is such a rare thing in this fallen world as fallen people to be cherished. And when you experience it, the last thing you're going to do is let it slip away. You want to hold on to it because it's unlike almost any other human experience. I don't want you to think, though, that cherishing is just sort of this extra credit that we add to our marriage, some high ideal for maybe the people that want the best in marriage. The more I studied it, the more I realized that in one sense, I think pursuing cherish is essential, even to keep our marriage where it is. We don't live in a flat line of a world that isn't hostile to our relationship because of our sin and our spouse's sin and the world's sin and our children's sin. We live in a hostile environment to affection. We live sort of on a slant where our affection for each other is assaulted on a daily basis. And if we don't push back, if we're not trying to crawl forward with cherishing, we're going to find ourselves sliding back. Just even normal life. I remember one weekend, it was a highlight in the marriage I had with my wife, Lisa. We had become empty nesters rather recently at the time. My youngest daughter had moved out to Philadelphia, but we were going to get to spend a weekend with her. And it's always a fun weekend with Kelsey. She's the last born, the classic extrovert. Lisa was the last born and the extrovert, so they have a lot of fun together and they talk a lot. And in fact, Kelsey was sort of the social manager, not just of our family, but the neighborhood. We had some friends that literally took her on every family vacation. It was funny, they were all introverts, right? And Kelsey provided all the fun. And one year, we went on vacation the same week they did, and they were so despondent. They're like, oh, this is going to be the worst vacation ever. We're not going to know what to do if Kelsey isn't with us. So it's just a lot of fun to be with her. And it wasn't just funny, it was a romantic weekend, which kind of surprised me because when you're an empty nest couple, you know, you can be physically intimate anytime you want, but there's still just something different about hotel sex. I don't know why, but I heartily recommend it. There's just something different. And so we had this great romantic weekend. We had a fun weekend. We had a meaningful family weekend. We had the whole weekend there. And then Lisa had made a commitment that could test it because she's not a morning person at all. I'm very much a morning person. But she agreed to take the first flight from Philly to Houston so I could work all of Monday. Now, I was up in plenty of time. I'd already been to Starbucks. I just wake up very early. And we had a plane to catch, and I had some events planned that day, so I wanted us to get back as soon as we could. And I was trying not to press Lisa too much because I didn't want to lose the aura of that weekend. Remember, this is one of those all-star marriage weekends. Everything was firing, and I wanted to take that same feeling all the way back with us to Houston. But I knew this is a test, because when it comes to making a flight, Lisa and I have two entirely different dimensions. I believe in boundaries, right? I believe that you leave enough time so that if you get a flat tire and every light is red and you make a wrong turn and the plane leaves early, you're still there, all right? You're going to make it. You've got a lot of time as a buffer. My wife doesn't believe in boundaries. My wife believes in divine intervention, all right? As long as God knows you fully intended to leave on time and you wanted to wake up on time and you tried so hard to leave on time, He will make every light green. He will hold the plane at the gate because He just knows that you really tried hard, even if your husband doesn't know that. And so I didn't want to wreck this weekend, and there's parts of me that I'm sure can just be so irritating. I'm not clinically OCD, but I live in the neighborhood right next door to it. So I'm thinking, okay, it's about time we should probably leave. And I asked Lisa, you know, are we about ready? Should I call a taxi? And she goes, oh, taxi's out front. I was like, wow, what happened to my bride? I mean, I didn't know when she had done that, but I thought I'll just chill. So I sat in a chair, did some email on my phone. 5 or 10 minutes went by. She zipped up her suitcase. All right, you can take my suitcase. Did you call the taxi? I said, no. You said the taxis are out front. She goes, no, I didn't. I said, call the front desk and see if there are taxis out front. If there aren't any, have them order one. Now, between you, me, and God, I heard 4 syllables. Taxis out front. I had had my caffeine. I'm a morning person. I thought in a court of law, a jury would probably find in my favor. But this wasn't about blame. This is wanting to take that wonderful weekend feeling all the way back to Houston. And so Lisa and I have this silly thing we do when we have disagreements, although it sounds silly, but sometimes it actually works. We just put the disagreement in the third person. So we're walking toward the elevator. I'm speaking to Lisa. I said, you know, honey, I don't know what it's like in your marriage, but in my marriage, one of the things that makes it so difficult is I have a wife who, if she wakes up early and hasn't had caffeine, she'll blurt out 4 syllables, and I'm supposed to interpret an encyclopedia worth of information, and I want to please her. It's just hard because I can't just fill in the blanks. I said, yeah, that sounds difficult. But you know, it's not as difficult as what I have in my marriage. And I said, really? Yeah. She goes, in my marriage, I have a husband who doesn't listen to me very carefully, but he thinks he does. And so I give him very clear, easily understood directions, and he doesn't hear them, and then it's my fault when the communication doesn't happen. I said, yeah, I guess that sounds more difficult, which, guys, is always where it ends up anyway, if you try that exercise. But if I were to ask you what makes your marriage difficult, nobody's going to say, give me 5 minutes to think of something. Nobody's going to say, man, I just don't know if there's anything. You already know, and some of you are hoping I will call on you so you can tell all of us what makes your marriage difficult. Because every marriage is difficult in its own way. Why? Because we live in a fallen world. And so we can have a great time together as a couple, but then life happens. Illness, frustration, somebody messes up, children, work, all of the things. And so then we're swept away from each other, and cherishing is what pulls us back. If we don't do that, what I've seen happen is that our affection for each other just slowly begins to erode. It's not instantaneous. It's not in a day, a week, or even a year. It's just like that erosion, drip by drip by drip by drip. It doesn't seem like a big deal until the wrong storm hits at the wrong time, and we see what happens when erosion is undercut what's underneath. The whole mountain of our family can collapse into the water. That's because I believe if we're not pushing back with cherishing, we're slowly sliding toward contempt. I've seen this with other couples. Lisa and I were at the wedding of a couple that seemed to be thrilled with each other, happily in love. They got married knowing each other and what they did. 15 years later, we're at a big dinner meeting. There's probably 5 or 6 couples around a table. We're at the end right with them, and we've all been talking. The husband hadn't been contributing much. He's very much an introvert, more of a... He feels more at home in the world of science fiction than in a restaurant, which I'm not slamming it. It's just who he is. And he hadn't spoken up at all. I thought, well, I just trying to be polite, and I would bring him in. And so something came up where I thought he might have an opinion. And I said, well, don't chefs think such and such? Before he could answer, his wife shouted out, he's not a chef, he's a cook. And he said, honey, he could call me a chef. No, he can't. Chefs prepare things. You just heat things up. Now, what he does, he works in a nursing home. Because budgets get cut in nursing homes, sometimes he does have to heat things up. He works his best to prepare 3 great meals, nutritious and tasty. And when he's doing that, I see a man who is doing the Lord's work. What does James 1:27 say? Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and even faultless is this: look after orphans and widows in their distress. It's a demographic often just cast aside, maybe a weekly visit from family members, and I know that can be difficult. I'm not criticizing anybody. But here he is 3 times a day trying to bless them, and I thought a wife could actually get excited about that. And if the budget is cut, rather than responding with contempt, why wouldn't she say, Lord, you fed thousands of people with 5 loaves and a couple fish. Maybe you could inspire my husband. Maybe you could do a supernatural miracle today that he could find ways to stretch that budget and really serve people that you care about. But where did the contempt come from? She knew what he did when she married him. And I just, when I have these encounters, I'm just trying to think through what is even the purpose. What does she think will be accomplished by that? Does she think they're going to have a special evening when they get home? He'll say, oh, honey, wasn't that wonderful? Let me rub your shoulders before you go to bed. Or was he silent all the drive home as he was the rest of the dinner? And that piles on the contempt. Not only does he have a nowhere job, he can't even hold a conversation on the ride home. That didn't happen overnight. We saw them 15 years before. It slowly, contempt had seeped in until contempt had actually blinded her to who he really was. She was afraid I might give him more respect than he deserved. But I'll tell you, my respect that night wasn't lessened for him. It's what happened in this marriage. So here's what I want to scare you with a little bit tonight to encourage you toward cherishing. I want to ask this question. What if there is no status quo in marriage? You might be sitting here and I say, well, my marriage is okay. I'm not going to say it's A+. We might not even be in an A season. It's a busy time, but we got a B+ going. We got to be maybe A- on good nights, and I'm happy with that. I have a full life. I have a tough job. The kids are young. We're okay with that, and I get that. But what I'm saying is, what makes us think if we do nothing, we can stay at the status quo? I've seen too many couples that think that somehow the marriage survives in a fallen, evil world without pushing it forward, and I rarely see that work. What if staying where you are isn't an option? You're going up or you're going back. What if every day of marriage is an ascent toward cherishing each other or a descent toward contempt? Because I believe that's a truer picture of life. We are climbing up toward learning what it means to cherish, or we are sliding toward what means contempt. It's not just that we live in a fallen world, it's who we are psychologically and spiritually. It's a spiritual truth that if we're not giving due honor to someone, we're moving toward contempt. It happens with God when Paul says they didn't give God thanks and they didn't glorify Him as God, and so eventually they didn't stay lukewarm. They began to have complete contempt for God. You see it in institutions. Over 340 years ago, a man by the name of John Harvard founded a college called Smart People up here in Eau Claire. He donated his library, much of his income, and the purpose of the school was to take young men and train them to be pastors in the colonies to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. That was the charter. And so the first symbol of Harvard was this. It's in Latin. Veritas is truth. Christo e Ecclesia. Truth is found in Christ and the church, or truth for Christ and the church. That's what Harvard's mission was. And for 100 years, that's what it did. But something happened. Christ stopped being the center of it. I talked to a woman who graduated from Harvard some years back. It was a master's level program. And she said, while there are pockets of real faith and even heroic faith there, her experience in that particular branch of the school, the graduate school, was one of the most hostile experiences toward her faith, the most contempt spewed toward her for believing that she has ever experienced. Until today, if you see Harvard's symbol, it's Veritas, truth. No Christ, no church. We'll just pursue truth. John Harvard's heart would be broken. He couldn't imagine. How could an institution whose original purpose was to celebrate the gospel suddenly not have room for a gospel, so that in 2018 at the commencement exercises, I know I was there, obviously not graduating, but I was there. The invocation was given by an imam. And the fact that it went from John Harvard to an imam praying over the graduating classes is what I see in marriages when they are head over heels in love and adoring each other. And then he's not a chef, he's a cook. It happens toward God. It happens toward our spouse. We've got to find a way to push it back. Which means, husbands, if we don't want this to happen in our marriage, our wives want to know more than they're simply loved. Loved is good. It's important. They want to know they're cherished. They want to know they have this delight in our eyes. As Song of Songs would say in 4:9, you have stolen my heart, my sister, my bride. You have stolen my heart with one glance of your eyes. We live in a world that has reduced a woman's definition of beauty to absurd levels and absurd ages and all of that. And God wants His daughters to be cherished by their husbands so that they know there's something about her that just captures our eyes, that we get her in a way nobody else does, that this is our favorite place, this is our favorite person, and cherishing can get us there. Just before Cherish was published, the book was already written. I was working in my office. Again, it was early in the morning. My home office is right next to our master bedroom. And I finally heard Lisa stirring. And the best way to describe it is my heart leapt. I was excited because I knew what the next 5 minutes would hold. Lisa's a very healthy person, so when she gets up, she's immediately got to have a big glass of water and you get some lemon juice in there or something. It's supposed to do something about the balance of your body. I don't know. She could explain it to you, and she'd be happy to. But and then I would hear her shuffle down the hallway, and she'd push open my office door, and she'll come up to my chair and just stand there and talk to me about her dreams or what's coming up on the day or any questions she has, and I'll give her a little hug while I'm sitting down. Many days that can literally be the favorite part of my day, and it surprised me. Because when I believe God challenged me to start cherishing my wife, I'll admit I did it out of conviction from God. I had made this promise. God wanted me to cherish His daughter. I needed to learn how to do that. I didn't anticipate, because I can be very thick, what a joy it is when you cherish someone and they just wake up. You're excited because now they're awake. You get to interact with them. And if you cherish them, that's always a good thing. And I got to be honest, it wasn't like that the first 10 years of our marriage. It wasn't like that the second 10 years of our marriage. It wasn't until I raised the bar from loving my wife, being faithful, to cherishing my wife, that I got that delight, because it's just the way of God. When He calls us to obedience, we're always blessed by obeying. God's ways are always the most delicious, the abundant life, the best life, and the best marriage He could call us to. But wives, your husbands want to be cherished too. They might be suspicious of the word. In fact, when I was writing the book, I found out they were. I mean, ask guy, what does it mean to be cherished? And I get this look like, well, do I have to turn in my man card if I say I want to be cherished or something? But I'll tell you this, the concept, they're very thirsty for. One guy I know had a huge church. He's got 7 of the leaders were men. He was just with the male leaders on this one. And they were solid guys, looked up to by so many. Most would say they had model families and model marriages. He wanted to find out what was going on, really, having them alone. So he asked me a question. He goes, how many of your wives love you? And all 7 hands went up. He said, how many of your wives like you? Every hand went down. Wives, every man felt loved. None of the husbands felt cherished. My wife is a good woman. She loves the Lord. She's not going to leave me. She's not the kind of woman who would do that. But at best, she puts up with me. But the thing is, when a husband feels that way, it affects how he's able to respond to you, how he's able to connect with you. It affects how he can do other things in the world. We're going to talk in the second session, not this first one, about what being cherished does to a man, what it does to a woman, even outside of the marriage. Because just as you want to hear your husband say, you've stolen my heart, or you want to be able to say, your husband, you've stolen my... However it goes, with one glance of your eyes. So your husband wants to hear from Song of Songs 2:3, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. Maybe not in the 21st century. That's a little poetic for us guys today. So if I were to put it in modern language, it would be like this. Like Tom Brady among the quarterbacks is my husband in the NFL, all right? And I probably shouldn't say that in Green Bay country, but... I have a friend who, he's pretty well off. He lives in New England. He came down to Houston 2 years ago when New England was in one of their 9 Super Bowls that has had Brady being quarterback for him. And he was laughing because he said, you know, you'd think guys would kind of hate Tom Brady because he's got everything. He's got the Hollywood handsome looks, literally married to a supermodel, Gisele Bündchen. He's wealthy, and yet his wife out-earns him. He's got this cool job. He's an NFL quarterback. He's probably going to play till he's 83. I mean, it's amazing what this guy has. He goes, you'd think everybody would hate him. He says, but, man, you take the city to 9 Super Bowls and you bring back hardware 6 times. He goes, everybody loves him. He's telling me the joke that was going around then was a husband was waking up one morning because his wife was hitting him over the head with a pillow. And he goes, honey, what's the matter? She goes, I had a dream last night, and you were having an affair with Gisele Bündchen. He goes, honey, that's absurd. I would never do that to Tom Brady. Yeah, I know. All right. Here's the good news. I don't want to present this as some high ideal that if your marriage just fires just right, you can get it. I wouldn't have written this book, and I wouldn't be here tonight if I didn't believe this in the bottom of my heart. Cherishing our spouse is something we can learn to do. Because the perfect God who cherishes the imperfect us is more than capable of teaching us to cherish our imperfect spouse. He'll empower us, He'll equip us, He'll inspire us. And we won't get everything out tonight, but at least I hope to provide hope that you can see that He can give you a different marriage. But where does it begin? And that's how I want to enter this first session. Where does it begin? Well, where Christian transformation always ends. Paul says in Romans 12:2, be transformed by the renewing of your minds. So, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So, how we think. We have to think about our marriage differently. If you decide, okay, I want to try this, I want to cherish my spouse, where does that begin? You have to think about your spouse in a certain light. And I would push you back to the very Garden of Eden. Think about this. For a brief period of time, in one moment, Eve was literally the only woman in the world. There was no one Adam could compare her to. He couldn't say, well, she's beautiful, but she's not as athletic as this one, or as funny as this one, or as strong as this one. It was Eve defining for Adam what a woman is. And this is even more difficult, what a wife is supposed to be. He didn't know a woman could be any other way. He didn't know a woman could look any other way. All he said, this is woman, this is my wife, this is what I have. And the same thing was true of Eve. Adam defined for her what a husband is and what a husband is supposed to be. So if we want to begin cherishing our spouse, we have to develop this commitment to contentment. That on the day we get married, evaluation stops, comparison stops, and we start saying, you are my Eve, the only woman in the world. You are my Adam, the only man in the world. I'm not going to compare you to anyone. I'm not going to challenge you with anyone. I'm not going to say, well, you don't have this and he has that, or you don't have this and she doesn't have that. I'm not going to expect you to be what you're not. I've chosen you, and you are my Adam, and you are my Eve. I just want to ask you something, because we do things sometimes that are so destructive. Has negatively comparing your spouse's weaknesses to another spouse's strengths, has it ever made you feel happier? After you think about it, you walk away saying, boy, I'm so excited now. Has it ever made you feel better about your marriage? Has it ever inspired your spouse to grow, to develop, to evolve? No, I bet they've seen that disappointment, and it's discouraged your spouse until some just quit trying. They just give up. He can't be pleased. She'll never be satisfied. So why bother? And yet, I've seen couples try this same strategy of negative comparison for 10 years, for 20 years, for 30 years. You can say, someday you might wake up and say, this just doesn't work. But when we have this attitude that this is my wife, she is who God has given me, she doesn't have to be anyone else, then I can begin cherishing her. Then I can begin appreciating her. It's the negative comparisons that lead us toward contempt. And you know what? When we do this, it makes even the best accomplishments in life that much sweeter. Because I believe the way God designed us, there is nothing in human experience like a cherishing marriage. And it makes the difficult aspects of life easier to endure. I come from the Pacific Northwest, so I've been in Texas for about a decade. So I will still die a Seahawks fan. It's your team when you grow up. I can't let it. And let me just say, since I'm talking to a room full of Wisconsin people, thank you so very much for Russell Wilson. All right? You guys have had your share of quarterbacks at the Green Bay Packers. Thank you for letting one slip from University of Wisconsin up to the Pacific Northwest so we could have at least one Hall of Famer in our history. And when the Seahawks finally went to the Super Bowl and won it, Pete Carroll, I mean, I just want you to think about it. He'd been a college coach, pro coach, goes back to college, then gets back into the pros. And now he's reached the pinnacle. He's made it to the Super Bowl. And then he's gone a step further. He's won the Super Bowl. He's going to have a special place in that city's heart. Everybody wants to talk to him. Everybody wants a piece of him. Any number of people want to share this moment with him. But in Pete's mind, he shows you just how intense a cherishing marriage could be. Here's what he did. All right, we will work on the videos for the next session. That's okay. What he's saying is in the midst of that, he said the confetti's flying. Everybody wants to get together. He says, but I was just looking for Glennis, his wife. She was the only woman in the stadium. Think about the power of that moment when you think you might want to spend it with the assistant coaches. Hey guys, we figured it out. We got it done. Or the players, I told you you could do it. I believed in you and we got it done. But for him, he didn't want the interviews. He didn't want the other coaches. He didn't want the players. It wasn't complete until he saw his wife. A stadium filled with screaming people. But for him, only one person existed. And that was his wife. And that's basically what cherishing leads us to put each other above everything that happens to us and everyone else next to our love for our Heavenly Father. All I'm asking you to do really is to have the same attitude toward your spouse that others kind of expect us to have. I was doing a sacred marriage conference some years ago at a very large church, and they'd put me in this green room, and Lisa was setting up the book table, and some of you have met Lisa. And you might not have known she was Lisa because we don't really look like we belong together. She eats so healthy. She just looks much younger than me. She's been asked at the table one time, you know, you must be so proud of your daddy. And she says, I am, but he didn't write these books. So that's just in defense of what happened. So they came running into the green room. They said, Gary, we can't open up the doors until we do a mic check. We forgot to mic check. Can you please hurry? So I'm following him. And I see Lisa setting up the books. And I want to acknowledge her. I don't want to ignore her. So I just kind of playfully, I don't have time, so I just playfully pat her on the rear end and smile as I go by, which she doesn't mind, or I wouldn't do it. It doesn't feel demeaning to her. And yet this middle-aged woman saw this going on, and Lisa said she just got this nasty look on her face. And she marches up to my wife. Is that Gary Thomas? And Lisa's just taken aback by her. She goes, yeah, it is. She got even angry. Are you his wife? And Lisa felt like I was being insulted. She wouldn't normally respond this way. And so she said, no, he was with his wife last weekend. This weekend, it's my turn. And I said, you can't say that. And she goes, but Gary, that's so not you. In a million years, that's not you. I go, she doesn't know that. She's never met. She did set it straight, so we wouldn't have rumors flying out there. But this woman just had this attitude that I would only talk to my wife a certain way, act a certain way. And so I just want to have the same expectations for myself. I remember praying when I was a newlywed husband, Lord, let Lisa define for me what a beautiful woman is. And God answered that prayer. It amazed me today. If I'm attracted to a woman, it's because there's something about her that reminds me of Lisa. God wants to answer that prayer. And what I love about that is being a guy in his later 50s, I never wanted to be the 50-something guy leering at his 20-something daughter's friends. Because I didn't know this when I prayed the prayer in my 20s, but what happens is my definition of the most beautiful woman in the world ages with my wife. And I get to be so satisfied. It makes you so satisfied when you get to sleep with the most beautiful woman in the world in your eyes. And you really feel that way. But I don't want to reduce this to physical attraction. It's about growing old together. It means spiritually and mentally and emotionally and relationally what husbands can do and can't do, what wives are and what they aren't. It's having this commitment to contentment. This is my Adam. This is my Eve. I will stop comparing you so that as we go forward, we're going to talk about this next session, I can learn to appreciate you. I can remember what drew me to you so that I can actually, honestly, genuinely cherish you. Because here's what I've learned. The more I cherish my spouse, the more I cherish my spouse. Infatuation hits, you can't make it hit, and then it fades and you can't bring it back. Cherishing is the opposite. You can choose to cherish. It begins with the mindset, and then we're going to talk about a very important practice. There are other things we can't get into tonight, but it is something you can choose to build, and that's why I think it's a biblical truth, not just some notion that somebody thought up sometime. Because here's my goal for being here tonight, I'll be honest. I want to make younger couples jealous of the older couples in the church. Not so that we feel superior to them, but I think it's so sad when a young infatuated couple think they have something better than the older married couples. And the reason I do that, not to feel superior, but I know infatuation neurologically has a shelf life of 12 to 18 months. That infatuation is going to die. And I want the younger couples to know, hey, there's something better. You don't have to recapture the infatuation. Infatuation is desperate, it's insecure, it's clingy. It doesn't really fit with a productive life. But cherishing is built on genuineness, and it can grow through the ages. It's not insecure, it's the definition of security. And I know it seems like a lot. How could that really happen? But it's not a lot if it's already happened. One of our good friends is Dr. Greg Bledsoe. He's the Surgeon General in the state of Arkansas. But when he was just a young med student, just getting started, he was doing rounds with his resident physician. They walked into a hospital room of a patient couple, actually. They were both in their 80s. The wife had a neuromuscular disease, so she was in a wheelchair, and she would just sit there and moan. She couldn't really move, and her head was cocked to a side, and she couldn't keep her mouth shut, so some drool would be coming at the corner of her mouth. And Greg was shocked. This guy just lovingly, adoringly is wiping the drool from her mouth. And Greg, as a single young man, might saw that and he said, Gary, I got to admit, I was so sorry for the guy. I mean, usually it's the reverse. It's the guy that's broken down and the wife's taking care of him. He goes, but I just thought at this stage in your life, having to put up with that's the last thing you deal with. He goes, I just so felt sorry for him. Then he looked at where the wife lived, her address, and he saw on the chart where the husband lived. It was identical. He didn't pick her up at a nursing home. He was her caregiver, and he knew what that meant around the clock. And he found himself praying just spontaneously, dear God, not me ever, please. When I choose a woman to marry, don't let me choose someone where I'm going to be in that situation. The resident physician got a page. They still used pagers back then. He had to leave, left Greg alone with the couple. And Greg said it was so awkward. He didn't have enough medical training to further the examination. What was even more awkward is that the husband had seen the way that Greg looked at his wife. And he had seen the way that Greg was looking at him with pity. And he had a wrong to right. And he just began bragging on his wife. As you wouldn't have believed the fisherman she was. He goes, we'd set off trot lines in that lake 2.5 miles down the road. She would catch them like no, I don't know how she did it, but every time she outfished them all. It was amazing. And then Greg went on. I'm just going to let Greg tell the story. It's pretty powerful when he says this. For the next 10 minutes, I was transfixed as this man, who moments before I had pitied, regaled me with story after story of his life together with his wife. It was incredible. What was even more incredible, however, was the change that occurred in me. Watching this elderly man caress his wife's hand, kiss her cheek, wipe away her drool, and joyfully recount their lives together provoked a powerful transformation of perspective within me. Gone was any semblance of pity. Instead, in its place was envy. Envy. Now, I want to point out something. When Greg first went in there and he thought he saw a man just loving his wife, sacrificing, serving, being faithful, being committed throughout all the trials of life, he felt sorry for him. It wasn't until he saw the man cherish his wife that he felt envy. That he realized when he was wiping away her drool, he was back to being a 22-year-old kid who saw a little ice cream on his date's cheek and saw a chance to get a little skin-to-skin contact if he wiped it off. That a Victoria's Secret model with a degree in quantum physics could walk by. He's not turning his head because he's with the most beautiful woman in the world. His Eve, the only woman in the world. And he was quite satisfied. Thank you very much. And that couple cherishing each other inspired a young man even before he got married. And my prayer is that by being here and pursuing Cherish, that the other families in Eau Claire would see a difference in the marriages represented here. That there's a new bar that we're looking for as believers to honor God. We're not denigrating love, but we want to lift it to love and to cherish. Let's pray. Father, I just ask that you would divinely suspend disbelief. If your enemy is sowing doubts already, or say a couple's gone too far, Lord, I just pray that you would pour in your hope, your truth, your perspective, and reminders of your power. Lord, be glorified here tonight, I pray, in these marriages. Gain the victory for your glory, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Before we go to break, could I say this real quick, Keith? I want to mention, if anybody listen to Focus on the Family, my voice might sound a little familiar. They did a show today and tomorrow where I'm talking about the new book, When to Walk Away, Finding Freedom from Toxic People. And because, do we have the slide on this one, or is it the next one? All right. Because of this special thing in Wisconsin, what my publishers put together, these cards that you see on your table, it's buy one, give one. That until October 26th, and you can take a bunch of these cards if you want to do it for a group so everybody gets it half off. If you buy it through Amazon at whentowalkawaybook.com, don't try WTWAbook.com, that doesn't work, you have to spell it out. Whentowalkawaybook.com, you show that you bought it from Amazon, the website will tell you how. You let Zondervan know and they'll send you a free copy. So you basically get two for the price of one. Now, Amazon, for some reason, is still keeping it high. It's 22 bucks. We have some left at the table at 15, so you can do the math whether the difference, 2 books for 30 or for 2 books for 22 or 1 for 15. But the key to that is a lot of times it's difficult for us to cherish our spouse and be involved with our children when we're out of misplaced guilt, allowing toxic people at work or in-laws or adult children or other situations steal our joy, steal our peace, steal our self-confidence, and have us tied in knots. And I believe God just led me to sort of write this book to say, enough is enough. Let's pursue healthy relationships, redemptive relationships, and positive relationships, and follow in the footsteps of Jesus. I go into the book how many times Jesus walked away from people or let people walk away from him, so that you can walk toward your marriage and the healthy relationship. So we're back at the book table between that. Just want to let you know about that.
Okay, some of us have to go home tonight and get our kids to bed. And so if you would cooperate with this, move through this quickly. One of the ways you can speed things up, there's a menu on your table. If you can do a pre-selection of what it is you're going to want when you get in the line, there's 4 selections there. Carolyn is going to identify herself right now. I'm going to ask that Carolyn will start to dismiss tables. I have a few announcements to make. I'm just going to ask your cooperation. Get in line, get your ice cream, and try and listen with the other ear. We had some technical difficulties and then some sweet difficulties. So let me say this. This session is about 40 minutes. So I'm not going to finish quite at 8:30. But if you have babysitting or need to go, I won't be offended. But I don't know when I'm going to be back here, and so I don't want to shorten it. I'm talking with Keith. He said, no, let's go ahead and go through. So that's kind of where we're at, and we're going to get started. All right? On the session, great. 90% of marriage is lived out in private. How we treat each other, whether we're going to be actually cherishing each other. But what we cultivate in private at times can become painfully public, as it did for one unfortunate young husband when he found himself caught on the kiss cam at a Chicago Bulls game.
It's a warning to us guys that if we don't cherish our wives, someone else may do so instead. But it does point out some of the difference. Love means I won't leave you. Oops. Oh, you got it. You're doing it? I'm sorry. Are you controlling it? Okay, all right. Love means I won't leave you, but cherish means I won't ignore you, I will treasure you, and what we're going to talk about in this session, I will showcase you. If you treasure something, you want to show it off. And what I love about this aspect of cherishing is it completely confronts the natural selfish desire to wake up in marriage and think, does my spouse appreciate me? Does my spouse showcase me? Does my spouse praise me too? How can I wake up and help others see the excellence, the beauty, the wonder, the competence, the glory of the person that I have married? And we have actually a heavenly model to follow with this. When you think of all the romances through all the ages, I don't know that there is a better romance than that between God and the city of Jerusalem. I would say together with Rome, Jerusalem and Rome are probably the two most famous cities in the history of the world. But we know there was a time when Jerusalem was nothing. A pile of rocks, anonymous. Nobody thought of Jerusalem as anything. It's only because God chose Jerusalem and cherished Jerusalem that Jerusalem experiences its level of fame and respect worldwide today. And the book of Ezekiel, beginning with chapter 16, Ezekiel tells us the story of that romance, and it's a fascinating one. It begins in 16:4 with how they first met. Here's what happens, and this is God speaking to Jerusalem. And as for your birth, on the day you were born, your cord was not cut, nor were you washed with water to cleanse you, nor rubbed with salt, nor wrapped in swaddling cloths. No eye pitied you to do any of these things to you out of compassion for you. But you were cast out on the open field, for you were abhorred on the day you were born. In the ancient Near East, you granted a child legitimacy by washing the child with water, cleansing the child with salt, and clothing the child. That's taking the child into your family. If you didn't want the child, you could leave it out exposed, as Jerusalem was. And Jerusalem was so unwanted, so unattractive, whatever the case, nobody, literally nobody in the world, not even her parents, thought she was worth a little bit of water in the desert, a little bit of precious salt, a little bit of cloth. Said, Loan, this one doesn't deserve any of that. We're just going to leave this child to die. And so that first encounter between God and Jerusalem was actually a rather ugly one. When it says, I passed by you and saw you wallowing in your blood. It's the picture of a child in the muck and gore of birth. Remember, not washed, not cleansed, not clothed, just struggling around to find breath, all messy. And it's the opposite of how most romances start. And when you think of romantic comedies today, writers make their money by finding new ways for two people to meet cute. Right? That's what they call it in the industry. They get into a little fender bender. They spill coffee on each other. They have competing business interests or whatnot, and then they meet in a cute way. This is meeting as ugly as it gets. You know, this almost grotesque-looking baby laying there in its mess. Now, I know we're not really supposed to talk about ugly babies because they're all beautiful in their own way, but we can be honest and admit some babies aren't quite Instagram ready, right when they come out, and they're beautiful to their parents, but maybe only to their parents. Lisa and I, we went to a pro athletes, well, actually, a pro football players conference some years back. It was at an out-of-the-way resort where nobody would bother them for autographs. And what struck me is how gigantic these men are. When you see them on the television, you have big men next to big men. When you're walking around these guys and their arms are bigger than my legs, I mean, these are mountains. And one guy in particular struck me because he just had this mannish look, 350 pounds at least, but cut. And just, you know, hair all over. I mean, he just, 99.9% testosterone, right? You couldn't get a tablespoon of estrogen out of him if you put him through a wine press. I mean, he's just kind of that big, irking guy. And then we saw his wife. Maybe 90 pounds if she's wearing a wet, heavy coat. I mean, just this tiny wisp of a woman. And I was just astonished at this marriage. I turned to my wife, is it safe for them to breed? I wasn't sure. I mean, it almost seemed like two different species. Like, how would this even work? And then we found out they actually already had, because in the evening session, she's pushing the stroller. You know, these athletes, they have all the money. It's very clearly a girl. They got pink everywhere, pink blanket and everything. And Lisa was getting itchy to be a grandmother, and we finally became one, but hadn't been then. She's so excited. So she runs up to see the baby, and I noticed it. I don't know if the mom did. She pulls it back, and she just kind of flinches. Baby girl got the dad jeans, right? She's going to be lovely, I'm sure, and valued, and we don't look at appearances alone. But in that moment, it was more dad sitting there. And so that's kind of what it is for Jerusalem. She's not the kind of baby that says, oh, let's put her in a commercial, or let's put her on the cover of a box of cereal or something. This is like, nobody looks at this baby and thinks she's even worth living. A little water too much, a little salt, no, not worth it. A little cloth, let her die. And it sets up, and this may just show how weird I can be, it sets up one of the most precious passages to me in Scripture. The second part of verse 6, where God says to this ugly, abandoned, abhorred baby, I said to you, in your blood, live. Your parents said to let you die. No older adults would choose you. No siblings would come and rescue you. Literally everybody on this planet doesn't think you deserve to live, but I am the God of the universe, and it is my opinion you should live. And if you're here, maybe as a favor to your spouse, you don't know where you stand with the Lord, and you always think it's kind of funny on Sunday mornings that we're singing songs to God and we're so crazy about Him. We listen to the radio songs about Him. This is why, because a lot of us felt like we were Jerusalem. Fired by bosses, cut by coaches, ridiculed by siblings. Parents maybe never got us. We thought nobody really thinks we should even be alive. But when you hear the God of the universe, the wisest being who ever lived, said, you know what? Your parents were wrong. Don't listen to your siblings. Your teachers didn't know what they're talking about. I have a plan for you. I want you to live. When you hear God say that, life changes. You live off of that affirmation. We live in a hard, cold world in many ways. And when you can live with the affirmation of the wisest God, the most loving Creator, life is different. And that's what happened to Jerusalem. Nobody in this room needs to be defined by who rejected you. Romantic partner, parents, kids, siblings. You get to be defined by the God who chooses you. It's an entirely different life. It's the life you were created to live. And if you don't know what that means, we've got pastors here. I'll talk to you afterwards. We'd love to do that. But what this gives us is a picture of a Christian marriage that should breathe life into each partner. And too often I see marriage, because it's just based on love, actually breed death. Death of self-esteem, death of joy, death of peace. One partner feels slowly destroyed and eaten up little bit by little bit. And too often, sadly, the church's response was, well, as long as they don't get a divorce, right, the marriage is alive and God is on. I say, no, a marriage that brings death does not represent God's marriage to Jerusalem. It's not God's design for marriage. Marriage should be life-giving. God is the author of life. It's Satan who steals and kills and destroys. And we see here the God of life giving life to Jerusalem. She gets older, and I know this is weird mixed metaphors. Ezekiel's a weird book. I don't know if we could say that about Scripture. Kirk, is that okay if I say that about a book of Scripture? I mean, it just is. Ezekiel was very graphic. And so Jerusalem grows up. She's of marriage age. And God chooses to marry her. Significant. This is not an arranged marriage, which mostly was back then. This is what we call the love marriage. God says, okay, you're of age. I'm going to make you my bride. I don't just want you to live. I'm going to make you my bride. Out of all the cities of the world, I choose you. Now, you could think that God would have the upper hand. In the way a human relationship would go, He would have all the power, right? In Seinfeld language, He would have the hand, right? I'm getting too old to use Seinfeld analogies, but it was sort of like this. God says, look, you wouldn't even be alive if it wasn't for me. You should kiss my feet, wash my feet, fix this, do that, clean this, because you owe everything to me. He could have such an entitled view. It could be such an imbalanced marriage. But not when it's a cherishing marriage. God spoils Jerusalem as a bride. And Ezekiel tells us just how he does that. In verse 10, I clothed you with embroidered cloth and shod you with fine leather. I wrapped you in fine linen and covered you with silk, all the luxuries of the ancient Near East. I adorned you with ornaments and put bracelets on your wrists and a chain on your neck. I put a ring on your nose, not an ugly bull ring, but the cute one like they have in Portland, Oregon, that kind. Earrings in your ears. Now catch this. A beautiful crown on your head. Look at what's going to happen here. Thus you were adorned with gold and silver, and your clothing was of fine linen and silk and embroidered cloth. God doesn't just barely provide for her. She gets luxury clothes. She's wearing Chanel and Gucci. She's walking in Jimmy Choo shoes. Back then, 3,000 years ago, she doesn't shop at TJ Maxx or Target. She gets to shop at Nordstrom when it's not even an anniversary sale. All right, this is a spoiled wife. And it's not just what she wears, it's what she eats. Verse 13, you ate fine flour and honey and oil. Tasty food, nurturing food, the best food, the kind of wife who gets to shop at the organic aisle in Whole Foods where everything costs twice as much, right? And God doesn't look at the bill. He's happy to pay it. If it makes his wife happy, she gets it. And I want you to notice what this cherishing, this attentive care, this showcasing of Israel did. It took Jerusalem from a dependent, abhorred baby, so ugly nobody thought she was even worth living, not worth a little bit of water and salt, and he lifts her to a place where not only does she live, she rules. She impacts others. She is now a queen. Look at verses 13 through 14. You grew exceedingly beautiful, fit to be a queen. Your fame, she was anonymous, your fame spread among the nations on account of your beauty, for it was perfect because of my splendor that I'd bestowed on you, says the Lord God. God says, I'm going to give Jerusalem everything I have. I'm going to put my beauty on Jerusalem, and I'm going to lift her up. And what happened to Jerusalem? According to Lamentations 2:15, she became the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth. Cherishing is, I believe, a commitment. Most of us made a promise in our vows we could do it. What I'm also suggesting with showcasing is that cherishing is a strategy. I'm going to be bold and say this. You don't know what your spouse can be if your spouse has never been cherished. You have no idea the beauty that can be released, the impact, how their personality can develop, their spiritual gifts, the ministry that God might have given them. If they've never been cherished and supported like God cherished and supported Jerusalem, you don't yet know what your spouse can be. And we keep waiting for our spouse to change and become what we'd like them to be. What if we changed, cherished them, and watched in surprise at what that does for them? Because just as it lifted up Jerusalem, so it can lift up our spouse. That in many ways, Christian marriage is about releasing that perfection of beauty within our spouse that we see in Jerusalem. God didn't cherish Jerusalem because she was lovable. She became lovable as He cherished her. So that not only did she live, she began to rule. There's an analogy from the dance community. I don't think I've ever gone to a single professional ballet performance, but I read about these things and research them. And one of the most famous choreographers is George Balanchine. He's Russian-born, came to the U.S., and he had this phrase. He said, the ballet is woman. What he meant by that is that people go to the ballet to see the ballerina. It's her gifts and strengths and athleticism and beauty and grace. That's what people want to see. So the best male dancers, at least for couple dancing, know their role is to showcase the ballerina. It's not to step in front of her and show their muscles or their moves. No, they're lifting her and turning her, because a ballerina supported by a male dancer can just do far more than she could ever do on her own. And his job is to let her do that. Sarah Jessica Parker narrated a documentary on the New York Ballet Company, and I've taken some clips from the session on couples dancing. As I show this, it might be a little hard to hear, so we want to be quiet, and if you got to get around to see it, it's not a long clip, so it won't take long. But I want you to think of this in terms of marriage. And wives, this doesn't have to be gender related. You can do this. Your husband can be the ballerina, so to speak. Just don't call him a ballerina. But in your mind, it's sort of, you're changing that role where you're focusing on that, where I'm just telling you, this was revolutionary for me. Waking up, instead of wondering whether I'm happy in my marriage, waking up, how do I showcase my spouse? What it did, I believe, for Lisa, and what it does for me. So let's take a look at that documentary if we can get it to go. Go ahead to the next one.
When a male dancer is paired with a ballerina, he can support, stabilize, lift, and turn her, allowing a partner to perform feats she could never do alone.
One of my favorite parts of dancing is partnering. I love having a connection with someone on stage. There's a saying we have, the ballet is woman. The best thing I can do as a partner is to kind of disappear and make sure that everybody in the audience is enjoying her performance. Because it's not about you. It's about making the woman look beautiful. It takes true artistry to make a woman feel that safe on stage while she's trying to do all these different things. You just have to have that trust.
It's not always perfect or safe, but usually they'll catch you before your head hits the ground.
Usually.
Well, I got dropped on my head once. Partnering's a lot about confidence, and you have to go for things, because if you don't go for it, then it doesn't work out.
Right.
And a lot of these lifts I've never done before, and they're kind of scary. I'm sort of afraid of heights. With Craig, I'm not afraid at all. Well, I know he's not going to go with me, right?
Yeah.
Craig could be a little more confident there for us, but I think you get the analogy. Another picture that a professional dancer told me is that the way they look at it, the ballerina is the picture and the male dancer is the frame. And that's what, because if you cherish something, you showcase. If a guy cherishes his car, he's putting it on Facebook, right? A woman gets engaged, she's showcasing a ring, she walks with her left hand out. The same way, if you cherish your spouse, you want others to enjoy and appreciate your spouse, and you live to help others see your spouse at their best. And it's not sentimental. The male dancer has to know where the ballerina is weakest, never to shame her. Never to destroy her self-confidence. It's so that he can give expressions of support. One dancer told me that he would just like touch her hip right before a difficult move, saying, "You got this. I'm behind you. You can do it." And then he has to know her strengths, because that's what he's trying to showcase. And his goal, his job, is that in the final throw, he puts her in the spotlight, she gets a thunderous standing ovation, and he walks back into the shadows because his job is done. The ballerina is showcased. He's done what he woke up to do. And when I see couples practice this in marriage, it's more beautiful than I can describe. I think of Dr. Hugh Ross. He is a brilliant Canadian-American astrophysicist. He's got a website called reasons.org, and it's brilliant if you ever want to look at it. One site says, if you don't yet believe, look at these articles. If you are a believer, look at these. And I was there in Houston, Texas, when he held 5,000 of us spellbound, making it seem patently ridiculous not to believe in God based on science alone. I mean, he just looked like he had a different species of brain as I was listening to him. And then in the question and answer session, he's pulling out these figures and facts spontaneously that I'm amazed. But he let slip, I don't know what elicited, he just let slip that he has Asperger's. He's on the autistic scale, and I thought, how does this work out? So when he was signing all of these books, I went up to his wife, Kathy, and introduced myself. I asked her to tell me her story, and she was excited. The Lord got a hold of her young, and she was praying just even as a 12-year-old girl, Lord, your love, your grace, your mercy, it's life to me. And I want to give the rest of my life helping others know what you've given to me. Help me find a way to reach others to know you. Well, then she went to college and she saw this brilliant postdoctoral student named Dr. Hugh Ross. And she saw the impact he had because he's at Caltech. There's a lot of respect for his brain, but she also noticed some of the Asperger's stuff and some of the issues it was creating. So she tried to make some friendly suggestions. At first, he was like, he wasn't sure, but he figured out she was a friend. And then when it worked, he cornered her. Remember the Asperger's part? And he said, all right, tell me, Kathy, what I need to do. And essentially she said this. First, Hugh, let's start with the haircut. Make it look normal. Now, don't cut it yourself. Don't tell it. Just go to Sport Clips or something and say, cut my hair like it looks at Caltech. All right? Just as she goes, and clothes. Your plaids don't go with checks or stripes. Your pants should cover your socks. She goes, you know what? Just go to Macy's. Ask the saleswoman to pick out 2 outfits, and whenever you speak, switch those outfits, and you don't even have to make a choice. She says, and you give these great scientific principles, but if you can help us apply it, the connection with Scripture in a way that we can apply, it'll really make it last longer. And she said, and then Hugh, this is really important. When you're talking with someone, look them in the eye. It makes a big difference. Hugh literally took out a 3x5 card and he wrote it down. Haircut, clothes, application, look people in the eye, and his ministry took off. He wasn't doing a lot of the things that pushed people away, and he was so impressed, he cornered Kathy again. He said, look, with my postdoctoral studies and volunteering at the church, I only have 1 day off a week. Would you like to spend that 1 day getting to know each other a little bit better? Kathy said she'd love to. They fell in love, and they've been together ever since. I gave the analogy to Kathy about the ballet as woman, and her eyes lit up because it's her life. She realized she could reach more people for the Lord by showcasing Hugh and supporting him where he was weakest than she could by being the front person. And the reason their marriage has worked so well is that Hugh doesn't expect Kathy to have the brain of an astrophysicist to be his Eve. Not too many women do, or men for that matter. That was not tended to be a gender-based comment. And the reason that Kathy can so support Hugh and their marriage works so great is she doesn't expect him not to exhibit symptoms of a guy who has autism. She knows what he does. And she even admires his strength. He is a brilliant debater. He always wins. Think about this. This is God's amazingness. He's unflappable in a debate. And when his opponent gets personal or tries, Hugh doesn't pick up the emotional cues. He just goes right by him. He's just sticking with facts, and he's not, I mean, it's like trying to argue in a positive against a machine. I mean, it's just brilliant how God takes a weakness and turns it into strength in the right setting. And so together they have become more as a couple than either could be on their own by knowing each other's weaknesses, respecting each other's strengths, and facing life as a couple that cherishes each other. I'm talking all night on the horizontal level. Let me go vertical for just a second. I'm a sacred marriage guy after all. Let me just do that. Wives, imagine if you had a son with autism. Now, with this many people, probably somebody doesn't have to imagine. Some of you probably know. Statistics would suggest that. You love your son. That's too light of a word. You would give your life for that son, and you know the promise. You see his strengths. You look at him as an advocate, and you see how others treat him or look at him, and it breaks your heart every time. And some young woman comes into his life, and at first you're terrified. She's going to break his heart. There's no way. And then you see she gets him. And she doesn't just get him, she respects him. And she supports him. And you see your son flourish like Jerusalem flourished. So not just existing, but now ruling. Not a queen, but a king who rules and influences. You see him in his full strength. How do you feel about that young woman? I bet she's one of your favorite people on this planet for you. I bet you cry tears of joy thinking about what a gift she is to you and your family. How do you think God feels about a Christian woman who marries a man with some bad habits? Maybe not autism, but he's been hurt socially. He's weak in this area. He's never been strong there. But his wife doesn't shame him for that. She looks at him as Adam. He is what he is. He is who he's supposed to be. And she supports him and she loves him and she showcases him. And he becomes the man that God created him to be. Cherishing isn't just to improve our marriage. Cherishing is how we worship our God. Because I don't know that you could please God more than to help his son or his daughter flourish in who God made them to be. I want to also tell the story of how a husband did this for a wife as well. When Lisa and I moved to Houston, Texas, a couple a bit older than us brought us in. We spent first couple holidays with them, and we were enamored with Laura. Laura is just fills up the room in her personality. She was born in Texas, went to New Orleans to get the Spitfire, came back to Texas, and they call her one of those famous Texas large and in charge women. I mean, slight frame, but large and in charge personality. She's a brilliant teacher. She's a great hostess. She lights up the room. She's sort of the fire in the room in a good sense. And so that's how we knew her, and we were astonished to learn her background, which is very much a broken home. You'd never know it seeing her today. She told me the story of what she would do when she was in kindergarten. It was in the South decades ago. She'd come home from kindergarten, take a nap, pick out a fancy dress, put on stiff white shoes, and she would walk a block away from her apartment, safer time then, and just wait on the sidewalk corner until her dad came home. He would stop, pick her up, give her a kiss, put her in the car, and drive her the block back to the apartment where they lived, and it was her life. So one spring, she thought it would be a day like any other day. She got up from her nap, put on that dress and those stiff white shoes, and she walks out, and she's waiting for her dad on the curb, and he's not coming home. And she keeps waiting, and she's getting impatient, and her mom comes out and says, "Laura, honey, I think you better just come in." She goes, "No, I want Daddy to know I'm waiting. I picked out this dress just for him. I know he's going to love it. I want that kid. I'm going to be here." And so she waited. 30 minutes later, her mom came out and said, "Laura, you have to come in." And Laura was heartbroken. "What's happened? I'm all dressed up for Daddy. He's not going to leave me standing here." So she stayed at that plate glass window looking into the parking lot until her mom made her go to bed. And she kept vigil for a dad who never did come home. In fact, Laura only saw her father 2 other times the rest of her life. One of those times was 6 weeks before he died. As an adult, she knew it didn't have anything to do with her. As a 5-year-old, she didn't. As a 5-year-old, did I wear the wrong dress? Was I not pretty enough? Was I not worth coming home to? I couldn't wait for him to get home. Why didn't he want to come home? She saw herself as the girl all dressed up, left on a curb, not worth coming home to. She met Jesus. She went to college. She met Kurt, who ended up marrying her, and she told Kurt, this may not be a big thing out here, but in Houston, it was a big thing for a wife to say this to her husband. She said, "Kurt, I really don't care how much money you make. I don't care how big our house is or how new our car is. I just want to be cherished." And Kurt, to his credit, figured out that to cherish Laura, he had to come home on time. He married a real woman with a real past, a hurtful past. She was always a little bit that girl left on the curb. She was never going to be the wife waiting at home. So at 6 o'clock throughout his career, he left the office. It ticked off some bosses. Some co-workers didn't appreciate it, but as Kurt would tell me, I didn't promise to cherish my boss. I never promised to cherish my co-workers. I promised to cherish a woman who was left waiting on a curb, and I wanted her to know whatever the work is, whatever the task, she's worth coming home to on time. I was almost crying as Laura told me the story. They'd been married 40 years when she told me this. She said, "Gary, the best part of every day for me is still, it's 6:15. I hear that electric garage door opener kick on, and I know my man is coming home to see me. He left as soon as he could." And that support has gradually lifted her so now that she can shine. She doesn't just exist. She is a queen who rules. She says this. Did we lose?
Nope, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'm such a strong person. But the fact that Kurt lets me be me makes me feel especially cherished. I'm the upfront person, the outgoing one. Some men might say, hey, why should she be front and center all the time? But Kurt cherishes me for who I am. He lets me soar in those settings rather than fighting against me. For a man to let his wife be the shining one, that's special. And it encourages me to be, would you read these next words with me? The highest version of myself. Jerusalem began to reign. Hugh began to influence. Laura became the highest version of herself when they were cherished by their spouse. It's why I say you don't yet know what your spouse can be if your spouse has never been cherished by you. Instead of trading them in for a new spouse, trade it in for a new attitude and see what your spouse becomes. It may feel to you like you have a new spouse. Now, I get some of you may think, Gary, you don't understand the situation at home. And I don't get how this works. But in the little things, when you make this choice, you unleash cherish. And the more you cherish your spouse, the more you cherish your spouse. Here's how it happened with me. We knew a couple that had been married. They were going to celebrate their first anniversary as a young couple. I thought up a present that we could give to them that would be meaningful. I mentioned to Alicia. She said, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah. Do you need me to pick it out? No, I want to pick it out, but thanks for the idea. I know Lisa gets busy. She's got a full life. So a couple days later, I said, did we get the present? She goes, no, I forgot. I said, look, I'll get it. She goes, no. Let me get it. I'll get it. And she did. And she got it to him. And a couple months later, we saw him after they'd received the gift. And the wife is just gushing to my wife. It was so thoughtful. It was so kind. It was beautiful. It was great. Thank you so much. And I'm walking in as she's gushing to Lisa. And she caught out of the shoulder, over her shoulder that I'm walking in. And she kind of determined I'm picking up on this conversation. And entirely in her tone, entirely just to be polite. It was sort of this dismissive, oh, and thank you too, Gary. I mean, it was like, Gary, you and I both know you had absolutely nothing to do with this gift, but you married this incredible woman, so thank you for that, right? We got the present. And here's the thing, 20 years ago, I hope I wouldn't have done this, but I might have when I was just focusing on love. I might have immediately jumped and said, what are you talking about? That gift was my idea. And I had to remind her she forgot about it. And who do you think paid for that gift? Instead, why did I say, as I did, what present? And then why did Lisa jump in? Oh, don't be silly, Gary. You know that present was your idea. It's because when you truly cherish your spouse, you love it when others are bragging on your spouse. I'm that male dancer. I'm not going to step in front of the ballerina and steal her thunder, standing ovation. It gives me pleasure to see people celebrate my wife, because when you cherish someone, you love to see others cherish them. So I showcase her, others appreciate her, they tell me about it, I want to showcase her more, and I think of her more, and it just builds from here to here to here. But for me, it was a revolutionary new way of looking at marriage. Waking up, how do I showcase my spouse? And again, some of you say, yeah, I just don't know that I even see anything in my spouse to showcase. I'm not trying to play games, I get it. I know marriages, I know what contempt can do, and I know it can be difficult. So here's an exercise. There's so many we don't have time for. I just want to give this one and then a story to wrap it up. You may need to begin showcasing your spouse to yourself before you showcase your spouse to others. And here's how I did this. In 2016, for one of Lisa's Christmas presents, I got a blank journal, had an empty page for every day. And the first thing I did in the morning was to write down something she had done the day before that I was specifically thanking her for. So thoughtful for you to do this. I appreciate that. Or just something about her that I wanted to celebrate. And I would write it out before I started my devotional times, before I got any work done. I'm filling in that page in the book. And sometimes it would just be a sentence or two. Sometimes it would go on for a paragraph for a little bit more. And for a while, it wasn't that big a deal. I'd just, and then go about my day, 30 days, 60 days. After about 100 days, you can't put the same thing, right? I just can't keep repeating the same thing. And I'm having to say, okay, now I can't work, I can't pray. What can I write down? And then I'm asking God to remind me, what did Lisa do? And then I learned, and this was even more helpful, I got to start scanning her today. I'm going to look. All day I'm on the lookout. What can I write in that book tomorrow morning? Because I'm not going to get any work done until I do it. And what I did, I didn't realize at the time, I was literally training my brain to find the best of Lisa. And she's having a rough day, went right over my head. I'm not writing that down. It was irrelevant for the task at hand. And I remember in the summer, you know, you've got about 150, 200 entries, and I was traveling, and I remember being terrified. What if I lose this thing? Because I was writing it longhand. I thought it would be more meaningful. I thought, I can't replace it. I can't remember it. I didn't lose it, but here's the thing. Even if I had, it was already a gift to Lisa. Because think about what this does to a husband's brain. When your first thought in the morning is, Lord, how do I thank my wife? What do I celebrate about my wife? It changed the way I thought about her, talked to her, and talked about her. And so when I finally gave it to her, remember when I said I want Cherishing to make younger couples jealous? Well, my oldest daughter was there on that Christmas. And Lisa opened up the book, and at first I could tell she was angry at me because she thought I was giving her an empty journal. And that's just so not her. I mean, she's not going to fill it in. She's going to feel like she's supposed to. She's like, thank you, Gary, right? We've been married this long. And then she opened it up, and she saw what it is. She goes, you said something nice about me every day, even on my bad days? And then my oldest daughter said, sheesh, Dad. That's like something you never see except in a Hallmark movie that nobody ever actually does. And so it was this, and they should have a Hallmark movie in Chippewa Falls. I mean, doesn't it sound perfect? Cranberry Christmas in Chippewa Falls. And Lisa and I were talking about this today. We were taken out to a great dinner, and we were walking. Lisa said, look ahead. And we saw, well, what city did we eat in? Where were we? Chippewa. And there was a Hallmark store right there, right when we said, I mean, it's destined to happen, right? So there we go. I forgot where I was. So you showcase your spouse to yourself. You may have to take time. Okay, I'm going to spend some time, and maybe not as obsessive means. You don't have to do it every day. You could do 3 a week or whatever. But you're really finding a way to remind yourself, showcasing your spouse to yourself so you can showcase your spouse to others. Now let me, okay, I'm looking at this, so let me end with this 2-minute, I told you I'd be done in 40 minutes, and I'm going to be. A story that ties everything together. A couple of Februarys ago, I was in Winnipeg in February. Now you all could probably handle it, but I wouldn't recommend anybody go to Winnipeg in February. Even in Canada, they call it Winterpeg. I mean, it is a cold that grips you, that holds you. But there's one time I was glad because the guy picking me up from the convention where I spoke had to drive so slow, it was so icy, to get to our hotel, and it gave him time to tell me his story. His name is Terry. He'd been married twice. His first marriage, he said, was pretty traditional. He loved his wife. He was faithful. He was loyal. They had pretty traditional roles. He didn't have any real complaints. She got pretty sick after about 12 or 15 years of marriage, and the last 8 months of their marriage, she was terminally ill. And he had to do everything. He cleaned, he cooked, he helped dress her, he bathed her, he took care of her. Because when you love your spouse and they're dying, that's what you do. She died. He was single for 4 years. He met another single woman. She was a bit older, had never been married before. And they started dating. He decided he wanted to marry her. And the woman's friends were warning her, you know, guys can be so entitled and selfish. Your life is okay. Are you sure you do this? She goes, I don't think he seems like other guys. She goes, honey, nobody does before they get, but trust us. But she said, no, I want to give this a chance. And Terry told me, Gary, I decided to do something different in my second marriage. I said, I want to serve her like I served my wife the last 8 months of our marriage. And you know, as a single person, I had to do everything for myself anyway. Why don't I keep doing all those chores that I did anyway? I want to treat my second wife like a princess, so he called her princess to remind himself to treat her that way. And his second wife felt like she had died and gone to heaven. She was angry at her friends. What are you talking about? This is incredible. This is amazing. And then after about 15 to 20 years of marriage, she also got sick. And he took care of her, and she died. So he'd been through 2 marriages. He said, Gary, you don't realize how much truth you're speaking here. He goes, my second marriage was so much richer and more fulfilling and happier than my first marriage. Not because my second wife was better than my first. She wasn't. In terms of personality and pleasantness and faith, they were kind of the same. The difference is, while I loved my first wife, I loved and cherished my second wife. And that made all the difference. And that's what we often think. We think, man, Gary, I love the idea of marriage as you're describing it tonight. If I was married to someone else, I think, yeah, we could achieve that. Because I got to change my spouse to get a marriage like that and start all over. And Terry would say, you don't need to change your spouse. You need to change your attitude. You can have an entirely different marriage with roughly the same person if you raise the bar from love to love and cherish. Now, tonight, I just gave you a snapshot with the time we had. There are many practices that build a cherishing mindset. I'll talk about in the book, how do you cherish somebody who stumbles in many ways? That's from James 3:2. You're not cherishing a perfect person. You're not cherishing the fourth member of the Trinity. That person doesn't exist. I realize there are things that we have to do. What is the biblical power to keep on cherishing? If you just try harder, I believe this is a high call and a sacred call. If you just say, I'm going to try harder to cherish my spouse, I don't think that's good enough. I think the biblical power to keep cherishing an imperfect person is rooted in the gospel. I talk about how we do that, what it means for us, what it means for our spouse. So if this sounds like something that God might be stirring your heart, I don't want to sound like a shameless huckster here, but that's in the book. Lisa does offer the 3 marriage books, Sacred Marriage, A Lifelong Love and Cherish, in a package deal. I think it's $35 for all 3, which is 2 hardbacks and a paperback, or you could get it individually. Please don't forget about the buy one, give one offer for when to walk away. If you want to give those cards to everybody that expire October 26th, take a handful, give them to a small group. You guys could get them half off. You're happy to do that. But let me pray over you, and then I will let you go. Father, life as you designed it never comes naturally to us, but it is the most beautiful life imagined. You are a good creator. And sometimes marriage can feel cruel, and we might even think, what were you thinking? But when we hear your truth, embrace your teaching, Father, you can create a relationship out of the ashes that is beyond what we dreamed. I pray that every couple here could experience a little bit of that tale of 2 marriages that Terry did. That remembering their spouse as Adam or Eve, making true to that commitment, to learn what it means to showcase their spouse, and maybe beginning by showcasing their spouse to themselves. Lord, that the kids would notice something has changed. The church they attend would notice something is different about that couple. And Lord, you'd be pleased. You delight in seeing your sons and daughters cherished. We want to offer ourselves to you for that purpose. In Jesus' name, amen.
One of our Leading with Power traditions is that I like to say, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.